Blog Talk Radio.
Hi, Randi.
Hi, how are you?
I am good. It's still coming. So I'm going to start the show here.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Welcome to Unlimited Realities. I'm your host, Lisa Zimmer, and we have a wonderful show today. It's called An Awakening Heart with author Randi Tompkin, a personal self-discovery story where she also wrote, it's actually a #1 Amazon best-selling book for spiritual discovery. And she also wrote a book, The Power of Inspiration. And we're going to talk to Randi today about her personal self-discovery story, which is at the heart of all of us in regard to our quest in life, our purpose, finding our balance, our joy. And so I always love a great memoir or a personal discovery story. And this really just spoke to my heart. So without further ado, welcome, Randi. Thank you so much for being on Unlimited Realities today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to get to this point. I know it's been a trial and tribulation in regard to life and the ups and downs of circumstances. But I am so grateful that the network is working today and we can talk to each other. This is a great story. This was so heartwarming in reading it. You know, it's one of those stories where, you know, somebody wakes up from their routine, their normal life, and all of a sudden things start to look and feel a little differently. And I love how you described your journey. So in talking about this, we're going to start with your story begins where you're awakening into like a spirituality for, you know, an overall defining piece. It was you finding your spiritual voice in the 80s. And what were you doing prior to this discovery? Because you were in pretty much a corporate aspect of your life, weren't you?
Correct. I was just living my life. I was working, and I was traveling, and I was going to the theater, and I was enjoying my life. I was in the corporate world, and my goal was make money so you could, have the life that you want. And, I was making good money at the time and enjoying what New York had to offer. But I for some reason, felt like there was something missing, and I couldn't understand it because I thought, in my life plan, this was the plan. And
right.
Eventually I would move to Florida and enjoy my retirement. Like that was the Jewish plan that you followed. Right.
So, and many have followed that dream,
And that's
but you found
that's
more.
Fine. That's fine.
Right.
But for some reason, I was on it. I didn't know that at the time, but I was on another path, or I was being led on a different path, and that still might end up in Florida, but I come with a different mindset.
Of course. Let's go back because I find that time in life interesting, the 80s, because it was the Reagan administration. It was a very conservative mindset. People were doing traditional lifestyles. It was a very traditional lifestyle overall for our country, for our world, versus today. Good gosh, we're looking at, 30 years, 40 years sometimes. But, there's been big changes. So what was it in your life as you're moving through your corporate world and loving the New York scene? What was it that caught your attention to say, whoa, there's something more? There's something more. What is this that I'm feeling?
There was a show on. It was a series called with Shirley MacLaine called Out on a Limb. And that was what I would consider my wake-up call. I had read the book, but when they put it on TV as a series, I watched it over and over and over and over again. And that's when I realized that even though I was enjoying my life, I still felt there was something missing. That became my wake-up call. And in that movie was a man named Kevin Ryerson, who was a channeler. Now, you have to understand, I didn't believe in any of that stuff. And another one of my friends wanted me to go to see this other channeler named Robert Johnson. And I was like, I'm not into that stuff, and, that's not really my cup of tea. But I knew watching this show over and over again that I was going to meet Kevin. And I thought, and I thought to myself, what a weirdo, because he had long hair and a hat. I said, I would never hang out with somebody like that. And, now we've become good friends, and we've worked together for 30 years. And I consider him like my brother almost, but he's been a really great teacher for me. So that was my wake-up call, that the universe had me, and it was actual series, TV series with Shirley MacLaine. And that's why in my book I thank her personally, because if she didn't have the courage to go out on a limb, then I wouldn't be where I am today. So I'm always grateful.
I love that was your inspiration, because Shirley has always spoken to me, and that book as well resonated so much. In fact, I bought copies and gave them to family members, that book, because it was just so, it was one of those pieces where you were taking this very popular actress who humbled herself in this vulnerability and this state of perception and awareness that was far expanded beyond our consciousness at the time in the 80s, and to bring it to earth. And Kevin Ryerson actually did the foreword in your book. He was the channel that Shirley used in regard to channeling information from the higher realms. So he was brought to the public's eye through Shirley's involvement. And it's so wonderful to see that he's working and a friend of yours and did the forward on your book, because that's just a beautiful full circle event, isn't it? But Shirley has been the heart of the soul of a lot of this development in at least our Western United States. We kind of expanded a lot because of Shirley MacLaine and because of her work and because she wasn't afraid or embarrassed, And she still stands in her truth and her right. And of course, there's going to be always people who judge and evaluate and mock other people who come out with, the unexplained or the, unrealized by the naked eye kind of aspects. But Shirley was really a pioneer in our Western world for bringing the collective consciousness around in a more like obvious way. I mean, I know we had, many yogis, and we had tremendous, TM teachers coming in the late 60s and teaching us, and we had all the transcendental meditation aspects. But Shirley really hit the average Joe and Mary,
I agree. And I think that there were a lot of people that went through the wake-up process at that point because of her. So she had the platform to do it. So she was chosen, I believe, to do that. And all the people, I still even work with someone else, past life regression, that she introduced me to. So still in all, she's still touching my life, even though she's now in her 90s.
Oh, God bless her. She's a national treasure to me, and I hope she lives forever.
Yeah, me too.
She's just a light. I just love her.
I agree.
It's just one of those soul connections. You just know when you know when you know, So
That's
moving on in your personal discovery story, I find your story so fascinating because this is the awakening that has happened to so many people across the world, where they come out of their 9 to 5 to discover a world outside of their 9 to 5. And the fact that you really received this so welcomingly and so readily, it was, because, in the corporate world, you have a certain mentality. There's a certain logic. There's a certain analytical aspect to utilizing the brain that works a little differently than maybe tapping into the spirit world, which is more right brain intuitively based. So I really find your adjustment, your embracement, if you will, of both aspects of your brain so readily. It was just like such a rapid expansion. As I'm reading through your story, I'm going, wow, she really flipped through these changes quickly. You really moved through things.
Well, it's the experience came and I dealt with it. Sometimes I had no choice but to deal with it, like being under a car. But that book took me almost 9 years to write. So there was a lot of time in between that you might not realize. But and I also for a very long time kept my work life and my personal endeavors separate.
Okay. That's really intentionally conscientious of you. I don't think everyone could do that, but that really shows your integrity to yourself in regard to the compartmentalization of it all, because it's one of those things where in your discovery and synchronicity, you had an incident. Can you talk to us a little bit about when you felt God's hand and you were guided divinely on your grace trip and that experience and how that came to manifest? Because I found that is a poignant turning point for you.
Yeah, it really was. Well, I in an office and we shared the ladies' room in the hallway. So there were many different people in different offices. So I went to the ladies' room and I met this woman who was in there, and we just start talking, as I usually talk to everyone. And she started to talk about how she has planned this trip to go to Greece and on a sailboat. And I said, oh, I love sailing. It's one of my favorite things. And she said, I have one spot left open on the sailboat. Do you want to come? And I said, yes. Like, I didn't know her. All I know is she worked on the same floor, but I had no idea who she was. But I just knew that I was going on this trip. So I walked into my office after, we were done. And I said, oh, I'm leaving for Greece for 2 weeks in a couple of weeks. And they said, with who? And I said, somebody I just met in the ladies' room. And sure enough, my boss was like, are you out of your mind? And I was like, maybe, but so that night we met for dinner and I had written a check and I handed her over and I had no doubt that I belonged on this trip. I didn't fear anything. And then I found out that she worked in the same industry that I did, in recruiting, but a different type of industry, and that my boss knew her boss. So there was a connection, but when I first agreed, I had no idea. And we're still friends to this day. We still connect through Facebook. She doesn't live in New York wonderful. Anymore, but we still connect. Great. And she's asked me, when's our next adventure? So who knows? Maybe we will do something together.
That is so
that's
wonderful.
How it happened.
And was that the trip with Greg Braden? Is that right?
No, that was just on our own. But through that trip, then I was able to go to Africa, which was divinely guided, because one of the people on my trip was on the boat was a travel agent, and she was she had to take a test to be able to tell or to sell the trip to Africa. My dream, and on my vision boards, was Africa. That was like my dream. And sure enough,
wow.
she called me and said, my husband can't go on the Africa trip. You only have 2 weeks left. Do you want to go? And I said, absolutely. And
wow.
I didn't know if I can get all my shots. I didn't know any of it. But at the time I was working for NBC, I walked into my boss's office and said, I got a free trip to Africa. Well, it wasn't free, but it was a lot. You couldn't get for what I was paying because she was going to represent this travel company. You could never. I mean, what I paid compared to what it would cost. So I knew, and I to this day know that was God's hand,
right.
because I got my shots, and the girl goes, "We never do this," and then we never do this quickly. And I said, "Well, I want to go, so give me whatever you have to give me." And then Kathy, her name was Kathy, and she said, "Randi, they don't take credit cards," and I knew that was the only way I could go. So I walked into the office, and she said, we don't normally take credit cards, but we'll take yours. I was like,
wow.
okay. So everything
wow.
fell into place so easily, and that's how you kind of know that it was meant to be. So it was a wonderful trip, totally guided by God and Source, whatever you want to call it. And I consider myself incredibly blessed.
Oh, that's wonderful. And I love the serendipitous events of how, even the simple fact, not necessarily simple because these things can be a pain in the neck, but when they don't accept a credit card and yet at that point there's that grace, the credit card's accepted. Now, you talk a lot about IntelliKey and how that aligns in regard to your perspective, your life. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that is, IntelliKey, in regard to, how that aligns for you?
Well, I believe that we should really use our lives to make a difference. It's inspiration that helps people. And I want people to understand that my experiences in life are no different than anybody else's, really. We all sort of have experiences, good and bad, difficult and not so difficult. That's my belief, that we should all use. I want people to not feel alone. I felt very alone through my process.
Okay.
And I feel that I don't want people to do that.
Right.
And that I want them to realize that we're here to grow and evolve. That's what we're here to do. This is my belief. So,
yes.
There's a higher purpose of us being here, not to just make money, or we're here to grow and evolve and learn to love each other and support each other. And ultimately, that's what I believe.
Amen. No, it's that soul to soul contract that we each make before we come here, and we don't know how that necessarily is going to manifest or the people that it's going to touch, but in that vein of service, it is all of our purposes, and it doesn't mean everybody has to be a healer or everyone has to be a necessarily titled light worker, but it does mean that you give of your heart, yourself, your soul, and in that giving, you're changing yourself in a more compassionate being, as well as touching upon the souls of others. And I love that that's your mantra, your belief, your guide. Because in that, you're teaching everyone who crosses your path that piece. And I think that's just a beautiful, unconditional, expansive consciousness we all need on this planet. And however it can touch whichever person is how it's going to be touched. Like, some people will be inspired. Some people will feel obligated. It's going to touch people differently, I really also wanted to get into, because I love your perspective throughout this book, and I think that your perspective is something that it comes from experience. It comes from diving deeply within a soul awareness, a self-awareness, and sometimes that can be difficult for people. So can we talk a little bit about what the dark night of the soul meant for you in experience, and what you gained from that experience?
Well, I'll first start with it was a very difficult period in my life. Mm-hmm. And right. What I learned from it is about letting go, and it's about surrendering. And I believe that I don't believe surrendering is giving up. I think it's just right. Giving into a higher power that can guide you through life.
Yes. Absolutely.
So at that time, because it was so difficult and I was going through so much, I just got to a point where I couldn't do anymore on my own. And going through that was part of the reason why I needed to write this book, because I felt very alone. And I wanted people to realize that situation might look different for you, but that doesn't mean that Dark Days of the Soul isn't going to happen for you as well. But to me, the Dark Days of the Soul is about surrender. And right. It allowed me to have a greater understanding that it isn't about me. It's about, me surrendering to something bigger than myself.
And was there one specific thing or several things that triggered you into, because I know from personal experience I've had several Dark Nights of the Soul, and it can be one thing or it could be, a domino effect of things. So how did yours manifest?
For me at the time, I was going through a lot of things. I was hit by a car. I didn't have medical insurance. I didn't have enough money to pay my rent. I was going through bankruptcy. It was a whole host. I mean, I felt like God was, wearing me down. As hard New Yorker as I am or was, that sure. God really had to bring me to my knees through many right. little things. And so right. It wasn't just one thing. It was many things that was going on at the same time. And now it's like, okay, well, financially things are a little hard. Well, it will all work out. As you go through stuff, it becomes easier because you trust in the source that brought you here.
Yes. But at the time of feeling that loss and devastation, was it something when you're talking about, because I understand that feeling of being brought to your knees. As you're being brought to your knees, in your hope, in your faith, what was it that brought you up? What was it? Was it the aspect that you knew instinctively this was temporary, that spirit was speaking to you and saying, look, this is just a test? Was there some innate knowing that you had? Was there something that you were holding on to in your faith, or maybe a message or a mantra or a phrase? What was it that you held on to?
Well, I will say to you that I just knew I couldn't do it on my own anymore. Like nothing I was doing was working. So I felt like the only option I had at that point was to surrender to a higher power. I did have one friend who she's a channeler also. Her name is Sandra, and she was somebody that I've worked with for also about 40 years. And I called her, and I said, I can't take it anymore. And she was the only one who understood what I was going through. So she was my lifeline at that point. Because in my life, she was the only one who understood what I was going through, and she explained to me at the time that I was being stripped down. She explained to me what was happening. So once I had an understanding, then I was able to let go even more and allow it to just unfold. But she became a lifeline.
Well, and you have to give credit where credit is due, and that's for your own soul to reach out in the ways that your soul reached out, because, numerous times people have experienced hardship and devastation, and it hasn't been God that they reached out to. It hasn't been that surrender that they've gone through. I think about these people losing everything in these fires over in California currently, and I feel empathically their loss, their pain, their shock, their devastation. And I pray for their dark night of the soul to regain some hope and faith for each of them, because I know what that's like, that feeling of overwhelm. And, in your self-discovery of your own being hit by a car, going through financial, uncertainty. You had whammy after whammy after whammy. And I find that that's usual in the path of higher consciousness. Sometimes we don't listen to the first 2x4. It takes a few of them to hit us before we are on our knees and we say, okay, I surrender to the highest of the best of for all. And that's exactly where you came in. And thank God you had a lovely soul to guide you and help you and nurture you along the way, because that I find in support of one another who really understands the process of soul growth can be that saving balm that everyone needs. Sometimes you just need someone to validate what you're going through and not judge it. And not try to dissect it for you. And I find that can often be the healing balm so many souls need, is just really compassion, just love. It's amazing what can be healed and grown through with that emotion of unconditional love or compassion. And I'm so grateful that you were graced with that, because that's a lovely validation of spirit coming into your life to gift to that person. And look at how far you've come from that period of time. You're a warrior woman.
Thank you.
Much.
But
you're welcome.
The book was basically my way of saying or reaching out to people. And everyone who reads my book, who I talk with, I always say, listen, if you're having a bad day or if you want to talk, here's my email, here's my phone number, call me. I just want people to know there's somebody there.
You're so generous with that, because in these times and days, I know from experience, people are in need. They are absolutely in need of another, just a compassionate soul, if not for more.
Right.
I can't emphasize enough how much compassion can lift humanity. And compassion isn't about judgment. Compassion isn't about, oh, well, you should do or you could do. Compassion is really just sitting in the moment of the emotion of the other person and letting them know, hey, I'm here. It doesn't even have to be words. And I find that those pieces, when people are struggling and like these natural disasters and these fires and everything, you see these little helpers, these little angels that just come out of the crevices, and these little heroes. And as I'm saying that, I'm getting rushes from spirit. My whole body's lit up. But I want to emphasize that in the midst of chaos, in the midst of uncertainty, still lives love and life that lights our life up. And you're living proof of it, Randi.
Thank you. Well, I do feel the same way about the people in LA. My heart breaks. I cry when I look at the pictures.
I know it.
There's just so many, and more of the people that work their whole life for their house, and now they have nothing. And look, as I said, I've been there. Well, I haven't, thank God, lived through a fire, but I've been through other things that have made me feel that same feeling.
Yes.
And so,
yes.
but it's going to eventually empower them once they're on their feet again to realize that they are stronger than they thought. They are being guided. They do have helpers on the other side. I've also begged for my spirit guides to help me too, many times.
And that's another beautiful piece of your book is how you communicated with your spirit guides. And you have an interesting story that's unusual because a lot of people that I have talked to, I've been in this spiritual community for over 40 years. So I've been doing the work that's been my primary work for 40 years. So in talking to people, majority of people do not have their spirit guides just present themselves before them. And I found your story of your spirit guides, they were like welcoming you in. And as I'm telling you this again, Spirit's rushing me with a little flood of energy here. But you have a very strong connection to your spirit guides. And I was very impressed with that. And I'm not a person who's easily impressed.
Oh,
but
I am
very impressed with that.
I'm very blessed, and every day I thank them, and I'm grateful for them in my life. Some days, to be honest, just because I'm human, some days I don't feel them as strongly as I'd like to feel them. But that's not them, that's me. But yes, I'm grateful, that they presented themselves to me. I think they knew that I needed to know who they were, what they were doing.
Right.
I mean, I needed that for me to move forward.
Yes.
So
you probably needed that validation. Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's
the
wonderful.
hard New Yorker needed to know who they were and what they were doing and why they were doing it. So,
I get that. I get that really well, Randi. But see, that's the beauty of our connection to the spiritual realm is that they know us. They know what's going to trigger, what's going to make us pause, what's going to make us reflect a little bit. And that interaction of the communication, when it's defined really well, our signals really align and the connection's perfect. It's a beautiful alignment. And I just find, because more than not, people seek out to connect with their spirit guides. They seek to visualize them. They seek to feel that connection. And I agree. I know from my own personal experience, it's not that they're not there as much today on Saturday as they were on Wednesday. It's that my perspective is a little maybe fragmented on Saturday versus Wednesday. So it's our ability to dive deeply in the connective frequency with them. So, in talking to the audience here, I want to encourage all of you that all of you have spiritual help, spiritual guides, angels, guardian angels, however you team them in your belief system, you have those of a higher realm walking with you every single day. And it's not up to them on their interaction with you. It's up to us individually on our connection with them. So in Randi's experience, which I find so incredible, her power, her energy, her connection to her guides was already there even before she was ready. So, audience, tap into your spirit guides. Did you have an exercise that you used or appreciated, Randi, when you were recognizing your tribe, your spirit tribe? Did you utilize any type of exercise or technique more to deepen your connection with them or to communicate?
Well, at first I tried automatic writing, but that didn't seem to work very well for me. So then I started to work more of visualization, talking with them and just visualizing them there. But I've gotten to a point where it's not, I talk to them regardless of whether I feel them or don't feel them. It's like, I just talk to them. When I need them, I talk to them. I do want to say to the audience, though, that everyone's way of communicating is different. So my way was right for me, but that doesn't make whatever is right for you is how it's going to happen. So
right.
I tried many different ways, like automatic writing was something I tried. I did it through meditation. As you know, I've worked with some channelers that have helped me to speak with my spirit guides. And both channelers I've worked with, Sandra only channels spirit guides, higher level spirit guides. So so I worked with people that helped me to build that relationship. Antun Ray, who was somebody channeled through Kevin, is one of my master guides, and I was led to him through Kevin, and Kevin channels him for me anytime I do have a session with him. I used to have sessions much more than I do now. Now I can rely mostly on my own connections, as well as sometimes, it's much easier sometimes to have someone else be the conduit, so to speak.
Sure.
I want people to realize that they have their own way, and if they just ask their guides for some help in figuring out what's best for them, that would work for them. But even if they can't necessarily feel them, talk to them, make sure you invite them in. That's very important. You need to make sure you ask your guides for help. They're not going to, if you're supposed to learn a lesson, they're not going to stand in the way they're not going to stop the lesson from happening. But they are there to help you, and you need to say, every morning I wake up and say good morning to their, hello to Silver Star, many hours, Antun Ray, how are you today? Please help me with this interview. Please help me with this doctor's appointment, whatever is happening. So I do that every single day as soon as I get up. So if you start inviting your spirit guides into your life, and you don't need to have their names, you will see that they will make their presence known in certain ways, whatever's best for you.
I love that. And I love your including the aspect that there's so many ways to connect. And that's, as there is languages, we each have a unique connection and language to our spirit guides, and sometimes they come through dreams, sometimes they're right in our face, sometimes they're messages in our thoughts that come from a higher dimensional guidance. And so and like you were saying, you tried automatic writing. I too tried automatic writing, and it did not resonate with me either. So I get that, but also I know people who have tapped into automatic writing and it worked beautifully for them. So it's just, I think it's just more of a direct thing for me. It just comes right in. It just, it doesn't come through the writing aspect. It's not my strength, but I do encourage people to try it, and do it in the light of love and the, whatever your belief system is, that you're coming from the highest realms. You want to put that intention out there, because that is a powerful intention to evoke. And Randi, you also wrote The Power of Inspiration, which is a beautiful, beautiful reflective piece, in where you also, it's kind of like a self-study book, quite honestly. It's like a little reflective piece. And I find that a nice meditative addition to your book. It's a beautiful addition in regard to just reflecting upon the growth, because in your story, I feel like it resonates to every soul, and more importantly, women as we move through the world in our careers and our choices and decisions about life and family. It really pointed you in a very direct direction of spirit, and coming out of corporate America in this other spiritual essence. It's a very diverse energy, and I think that your story is going to speak to a lot of people in regard to this awakening that's on the planet currently, with many people who are questioning themselves and their purposes in life. And I also feel that not everybody, like I had said earlier, needs to be necessarily a healer or a body worker or a light worker, but in their own profession or in their own choices, they can take the philosophy or the perspective of being a helper. And we do that by showing love. We do that by having compassion for one another. We do that when we don't judge another person. And that, too, is being in service. We can physically do things of service, of course, which are obviously beneficial. But it's also in that service mindset, which if you can't physically do something yet or you haven't found your purpose yet, start with your heart. Start with an awakening heart. Because that's the piece we all need to get to, is that opening of our heart and having that love and having that compassion for fellow man. It all begins there.
I totally agree.
It's a beautiful, beautiful book and story, and I really feel it's going to inspire. It really spoke to me in regard to how many my clientele is primarily female. I probably have like 75% female and maybe 25% men. But this story, I know, would speak to a lot of women who are going through big changes emotionally and perspectively, I would say, because it's a consciousness movement. And sometimes people don't know what's happening to them when they're starting to feel things differently. It can be a little unnerving, and I love your perspective.
Thank you.
Well,
The Power of Inspiration is a book of quotes, because I think inspiration is important, and it basically came along because I was building a following on social media, and I started to put out quotes because I wanted to inspire myself, and then people kept saying, I came to your page and there was no quote today. And I was like, oh, okay. So they said the quote girl. So they started calling me the quote girl. Now, this was back in 2009, so we're going back a while. And now everybody puts out quotes. But I basically would put out a quote because every morning I'd wake up and say, okay, let me find something to inspire me today. So that was the purpose, and that's where it came from. Basically, I just wanted to inspire myself, but I was sharing it with everybody on social media. And then people started to say, well, you didn't put out a quote today. I was like, oh, okay. So that's when I put that book together, and I still use it. I open it every morning to see what quote could help me to inspire my day.
Right. I love that.
That was the purpose of the book. So it also allows you to do some of your own journaling to see how you feel about the quote. But ultimately, I think inspiration could help us to move forward for ourselves and others.
Absolutely. It's, optimism is so needed. And, we're in such changing times. So I really, really love the fact that you are bringing this and your work and your perspective and your light and your love to the planet. You are evolving everyone who touches your books, and I thank you for that. God bless you. And I know we're closing up the show now, but I want to thank you, Randi, for being on Unlimited Realities. You've been such a lovely guest, and your work is so very important to all of us.
Thank you so much for having me, and same with you. Your work is important, and you help us to get it out there. So I greatly appreciate it. And, of course, if there's anything I can help your listeners with, I'd be happy to do so.
Oh, you're such a generous spirit and soul, Randi. Thank you so much for that. And tell the audience where they can find you on Facebook or Instagram before we end, please.
You can reach me at Enrichment Inc. It's ENRICHMENTINC.com is my website. I am Randi Tompkin, TOMCHIN. Both books are located on Amazon, or one of the books is also at, or maybe both now, BarnesandNobles.com. but it's easier to just get it at Amazon, or there's a purchase page on my website with some other information about the books as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Randi. God bless you. God bless you, audience. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk next week. Bye-bye.